Hey everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Coco and Daltz. We're real people bringing you real reviews of all the latest TV shows and movies that are streaming on Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney+. I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.
And today we are reviewing Challenger, a week-old series on Netflix. It's a 4-part docuseries about the Space Shuttle Challenger accident from 1986. So, Daltz, why don't you let the people know what that's all about?
So the official title of the 4-part series, docu-series.
Do you want to start over again?
Is called Challenger, the Final Flight.
Oh, okay. Sorry that I missed the final 3 words of that, people.
Right. It's not just Challenger. It's Challenger, the Final Flight.
I don't think I actually knew that.
And it was on Netflix, like Coco said, debuted a week ago as we're recording this podcast. It is essentially it's a look back at this disaster from 1986 when Challenger was launched and exploded mid-flight after launch. And the investigation that ensued and what went on behind the scenes, what went on during, and what went on after. It's pretty compelling. We are featuring many of the family members in this docuseries, some of the engineers that were involved. A lot of the key players are in it, and it's a really good and comprehensive look at this disaster. Having
said that, I actually wish it would have been longer. It was 4 episodes that were all around the 45-minute mark. I think this could have been a 6 or 8 episode series.
Wow.
Yeah, and we usually don't say that about anything, listener, but I think they could have gone more into detail about the families, the fallout. Like it briefly mentioned at the very end, oh yeah, and in 2002, there was another space disaster and 7 more lives were lost. Like I felt it could have gone more into the fallout for NASA. So right. I would have taken another couple episodes of this for sure.
Yeah, and I think the major issues here are sort of like the bureaucracy and how human lives can get lost in the shuffle. So in this crew in 86, there was 7 crew members. One of whom was Christy McAuliffe, who many people will remember, who was the first teacher in space. Was supposed to be the first teacher in space.
Didn't make it.
She was not the first civilian because there had been a couple of civilians who had went up in previous shuttle flights. And the docuseries focuses largely on her and her family and sort of like the process of her being named and her backup, who was also a teacher, obviously. And I thought that was really kind of a compelling part and a compelling way to do it, was to sort of personalize this every person goal to go into space and how she overcame it and the challenges she faced and everything like that. And I thought her perspective was good because it could have been otherwise a very dry engineering kind of focused piece. It's like, well, we're talking about O-rings again, like it was more than that. Obviously it was about the people that were the lives that were lost. And I think sometimes we think of astronauts as being superhuman and people we can't really relate to because they have these, this incredible intellect and this incredible physical qualities that many of us don't have that combination. Well, other than you, Coco.
Aside from not having 20/20 vision and having extreme motion sickness, so right. I could never go into space.
Yeah, when they were doing that one thing where they go the round and around, the one that was in the right, the James Bond movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, I'm out.
Yeah,
Can you just push the button and I'm done?
Right, totally. Just let me put the spacesuit on and be like, I'm an astronaut for a minute, and then I'm not actually going to go through any of the tests.
I'll be the backup. I'll be the backup to the journalist who goes up and I'll be the second. Like, oh yeah, you go, man, because I can't do that roundy thing. There's no way.
Centrifugal force, not my friend.
No, not my friend at all. Like if we go on the Six Flags ride, I'm like, I'm done for the rest of the day. So
yeah, my dad and I did that when I was a little kid, and then we had to sit there for like an hour afterwards while my mom gave us water and pressed wet
damp cloths to your head.
Yeah, because we were both we had a really bad time with that.
Why do people do these things to themselves?
I don't know.
But anyway, the docuseries I thought was through her eyes. It was presented through her eyes and her family's eyes in a lot of ways, was very relatable. And it underlined to me, reinforced the tragedy of all this, is that the space mission NASA was designed to go up to space many times and deliver payloads and put satellites up into space, and the shuttle was the pinnacle of technology at the time. But the unknown factors at the time were that it was just a crapshoot every time they went up. They had no idea if it was going to blow up every time it went up, and it was just really nerve-wracking.
That was the thing that was both the saddest and most infuriating thing to me, was if you if you weren't alive in 1986, or if you don't really remember a whole lot about it, there was a company in Utah called Morton Thiokol, which was responsible for these solid rocket boosters, which were, basically the gas tank that got the shuttle into space. Although it wasn't filled with gas, it was like hydrogen and nitrogen. Or
it was the engine that got them out of Earth's atmosphere.
The solid rocket boosters were reused after every launch, so they would go out to the ocean, drag them back to shore, take them back to Utah, like refurbish them for use again. And there are these things in the solid rocket boosters called O-rings, which, so if you're like me, you have like shaker bottles that you drink like protein shakes and stuff in. And if you look in the lid, there's this little plastic ring that helps with the seal. That's basically what the O-ring of the solid rocket booster is. It's like a souped up protein shake bottle plastic sealer thing for your lid. And the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters started having issues pretty early on in the shuttle launches, and Morton Thiokol engineers are telling NASA repeatedly, these things can't take low temperatures.
Right.
These things are starting, like the first one is starting to like disintegrate.
Yep.
So the backup one, is going to have issues as well. Like every single person from Morton Thiokol who was interviewed told NASA, this is not safe. We can't do this. We can't do these launches. And NASA in the 80s was just like, drunk sailors spending on leave. They're just like, no, it's fine. We're going to do it. The American people love it. We need a show of strength, blah, blah, blah. And so everybody knew this tragedy was going to happen at some point. Everybody at Morton Thiokol knew. Everybody at NASA deep down knew, even if they were ignoring all the warnings. And the 7 people who went up in the Challenger were sitting ducks. Like they had no idea. They and their families had no clue that this was going to happen, obviously, or else they probably wouldn't have gotten on the shuttle. And so now you've got 7 people whose lives have been lost completely needlessly, that could have been prevented. 7 families that have been torn apart. Children have grown up without parents. Wives have lost husbands. 7 brilliant minds have been taken. Like, what could they have done? They could have contributed so much more, because they were all like in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
Like everybody was still in the prime of their lives. And that's the saddest and most infuriating thing to me, was that this was known. This didn't come out of nowhere. This had been known for months, if not years, that this was a thing that was an issue that needed to be addressed, or else lives were going to be lost. And it didn't happen until after the Challenger accident. And then Morton Thiokol was able to redesign the solid rocket boosters. And
it took 3 years.
It took 3 years, and then they never failed again after that.
Right.
The tragedy, the space shuttle tragedy that happened in the early 2000s, it was some completely different issue that apparently was also known to NASA, and NASA had been ignoring it.
Yep.
And then after that, they were like, oh, I guess we got to, redo this again.
It was on re-entry in 2003, I believe it was.
Yeah.
That crew was lost. So they make a point of saying that there are 800 and some odd astronauts went into space over the course of the shuttle and the space program for NASA, and they lost 14 crew members. And there's a feeling, I think, that that's really good as far as a percentage goes, but there's still 14 people that are gone and their families are destroyed as a result.
And people whose lives didn't need to be lost because
of incompetence.
Yeah, because of incompetence. Because, NASA just ignored the warnings. I said to Daltz at one point while we were watching this, I'm like, you can tell this is the 80s, because NASA's just like blowing money left and right, sending all these space shuttles, up, and, because we didn't apparently have anything else to spend money on in the 80s. And they were just, it was like a giant pile of cocaine. They were just like, ooh, look at what we can do,
Well, and with Reagan putting the heavy press on NASA to show the Russians that we being the Americans, are superior technology-wise. And so you're launching shuttles into the space. Like, well, the Russians aren't doing that. Like, what are they doing over there?
And somebody said something as well. I can't remember who it was, but they said that the Russians would not use solid rocket boosters because they felt it was too unsafe.
It was too volatile. So you know, if the Russians are saying that, then there's something going on. There's some credence to it.
Right, totally. And then, so the disaster happens. Lives are lost, families are torn apart, like everybody at Morton Thiokol. I was actually really impressed. The documentary crew got a lot of people from both NASA and Morton Thiokol to sit down for interviews. Everybody at Morton Thiokol who was interviewed, I mean, they were like crying.
Yeah.
They were like, if only I had tried harder to make NASA understand, like maybe we should have, you know, done something more the night before the Challenger launch. Like, I felt so bad for them because this has weighed on them for 35 years.
You can imagine the guilt that they've had over this, because it's not only the lives, I mean, completely and appropriately significant that they feel guilty about the lives lost, but also the space program. Like, the shuttle never really kind of bounced back from that, because people were, even though there were launches after that for many years, almost 2 decades later, people still remember the Challenger disaster, and they associate the shuttle with the Challenger disaster because we all saw it in one way, shape, or form, whether we saw it live or we saw the news coverage. And of course, those days in the 80s, you're watching TV at home and all of a sudden there's a news bulletin breaking in. That's how you're finding these things out. It's not like you're seeing it on Twitter or anything like that, obviously. So we all sort of followed along to it as it was happening, as it was unfolding, and you were watching. I remember, I didn't see it live, but I remember seeing very shortly after it happened and watching the pieces plummet into the ocean. And that stayed in my mind. That was seared in my mind. Even as a young strapping lad in Canada, who had I had no fight in the game, but it was a very traumatic thing. And I can only imagine all the school kids who were watching the live broadcast because the teacher was on board, and then you imagine how that sears your consciousness for in terms of how you feel about space travel and how you feel about spectacle and how you feel about NASA and the government. I mean, there's all these things that years later, people are still dealing with. I'm sure.
My school wasn't one of the ones that was watching it live for some reason. In January of '86, I was 9 years old. I was in the 4th grade. I don't know if the teachers had a TV on and were watching it in the teacher's lounge, or if they heard about it on the radio or something, because I remember between classes, like we were, walking into a classroom and one of the teachers said something to the effect of like, I can't remember if she said like there's been an accident or if she said like the shuttle blew up, but she said they weren't sure like what had happened to the astronauts. And then, it was 1986. Mm-hmm. There wasn't 8 bajillion cable channels like there are now. There wasn't the internet. Like, there were 3 channels, and the Challenger footage was just playing on a loop on all those channels. So I've seen that footage dozens, if not hundreds of times, like in the 35 years since that happened. So
yeah, and the sad part about it is, like you mentioned earlier, Coco, is that was completely preventable, and it was just a matter of it was arrogance, and it was organizational ignorance too, in terms of we just got to keep pushing this, and we got to keep going, and we got to keep on schedule, and we want to make sure that we get our funding the next year and the year after that. And it just was completely unreasonable. And
Reagan even tried to cover it up afterwards. Like he told, of course, there's a presidential commission to figure out what happened. And
by the way, the board that looked like it was like a scene from one of those cheesy high school quiz shows. Like, there was all these guys sitting in these really compact areas with their name placards in front of them and everything like that. It didn't look like it was very professional to me. But
it was the 80s.
Right.
And so Reagan told the head of the commission, hey man, go easy on NASA. The American people still need heroes. Mm-hmm. Like, they can't be told that NASA basically can't be found to be at fault.
Right. Don't embarrass NASA.
Yeah. And then fortunately the truth came out, and it was discovered, obviously, that NASA just recklessly went ahead with this despite all the warnings that they'd received. So fortunately, the truth did come out. And the head of the commission, when he first realized how things were going, like, you could see in the footage that it looked like he was like crapping his pants at the table, because this is not how Reagan told me to do things. And then when finally it appeared like, okay, the truth is definitely going to come out, like, that was when he turned on NASA and he started
grilling them.
Yeah, he started grilling them. But it's like, the families can't even get the truth. Like, I really hope the families just sued the crap out of NASA.
Right.
Seriously, because with all the documentation that they knew full well what was going to happen, like, I really hope the families just sued the crap out of NASA. And it's not going to bring your family back, but their, lives were lost needlessly.
Well, and it's also that pack mentality too of the military / astronauts, that whole group of people and that whole faction is that you just do what the government tells you to do, or you do what your supervisor tells you to do. And I think they were just falling in line. It's like, well, if NASA says we're good to go, we must be good to go. But the thing that really was reinforced to me throughout all of this was the fact that you just never know. Like incompetence is everywhere.
Right.
It's like you go to the doctor just because the doctor has a medical degree doesn't mean they're good at their job.
Well, hopefully the doctor has a medical degree. Sometimes you hear about people faking their degrees and stuff, but yeah, no, there's.
But hopefully the doctor has a medical degree, and you go there, and you're just. Sometimes we have this blind faith in institutions and in technology, and it's like, well, the person is responsible. They must be good, but not all doctors are good. Not all TV repairmen are good. Not all podcasts are good. So
but this one totally is.
You've got to be careful, and you've got to not completely trust the system. I mean, I've always believed in that myself. It's like just because somebody has a position of responsibility or authority doesn't mean they're actually good at that job. You have incompetence in every field, and that was underlined and reinforced by this docu-series.
Well, and me not being an astronaut and not being in a STEM field, I wouldn't go up into space anyways on any kind of NASA shuttle or rocket, because those things were made with, like, they accept like the lowest bids they possibly can.
Right.
So you're going up in like a bucket of bolts that's held together with like some tape.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't go up into space anyways, just because the bid that was accepted wasn't the one that was like the safest. It was the one that was the cheapest.
Right.
And you're going into space. It's
Right.
not like I'm driving from Hartford to like Philly, like that's probably going to be less of a risk.
So I think that the bottom line is we liked this docu-series. We liked this documentary. Yes. I'm a sucker for the documentaries, and this was a pretty good one. I have to say that I think it was the right length. I don't know if I would have. I'm getting a little bit tired of watching these things that are more than 2 episodes.
He's saying that because we are in the middle of watching Ratchet, which is 8 episodes, and we are not enjoying it. So it's taken us a long time to finish that one off.
I sort of miss old-fashioned movies, like 2 hours long and you're done.
But we just watched The Devil All the Time, and that wasn't any good either.
That wasn't good either. But at least that was done. Like
right.
we were in on that one. We knew it wasn't great when we watched it, but we knew the end was in sight. So like 4 parts, I was fine with that. I got enough out of it to justify sitting down for 4 hours, that sort of thing. But I would be interested in, there's talk of doing a lot of these things that come out as regular series. I would be interested to hear more about the space program and as treated this way. So, some of the other space missions they had. There should be another series made on the 2007 disaster and what happened there, or 2003, I should say, and what was behind the scenes there. Probably a lot of the same things, but the players will have changed. A lot of the executives weren't the same, obviously. And notice that a lot of the people that were interviewed, when they had their timeline below them, like engineer, it was like 1978 to 1986. Like a lot of these people got fired or resigned right after this thing. So that was interesting, but also in lieu of this, in this particular documentary, but also because there'll be new players in place, and what did they learn from this disaster, and how did they apply it? And the bottom line around this too is that NASA's not doing the shuttle anymore. I mean, they're not any shuttle launches. It's SpaceX. It's all privatization. So,
which is also another thing I really don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's for profit, right? So
right.
There actually, in some ways, there's more at stake, because you don't want a SpaceX shuttle thing to go up and then explode because it's bad for business.
Right.
Which is
because Elon Musk needs more money.
It's the driving force in a lot of things that happen in the United States. It's like, well, we got to make some money, and if anything hurts the business, then we don't want to do it. It's not about, well, is it good for the people? Is it good for the clients? No, it's about the money. So I would be interested in seeing another series, and we'll see how SpaceX does. I mean, they've launched some shuttles and they've brought some things back successfully. They had a couple of mishaps with explosions and things like that, but Elon Musk, like you said, he can afford a couple of mistakes here and there.
Well, there's better stuff to spend your money on down here on Earth. So
Right. We got some issues with it. Maybe we should throw some money at.
Yeah, I should have issued the caveat at the beginning of this episode that I watch this as not a particular fan of the space program because we have lots of hungry people right here at home. Why are we spending all this money to go up and collect rocks on the moon?
Yeah.
Which some people are going to be like, that's short-sighted. But yeah, you know what? I don't really care.
And a topic for another podcast, Coco, are your thoughts on the moon landings?
Didn't happen. There we go. Fake.
So, listener, that's about it for this podcast. I think that mine is 2 rocket boosters up, probably a booster and a half anyway. Like it was pretty good.
Yeah, I'd give it like a B+ to maybe an A-.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
I thought it was good too.
Yeah.
Unlike Dalt's, like I said, I could definitely have done with a couple extra episodes, but it wasn't overly long, so that's good. There's nothing worse than having to slog through 10 episodes of something you don't like, like Ratchet.
And like this one could very easily have gone there too.
Yeah, totally.
Like
there's a wealth of
engineering,
information.
Yeah. And the fact that they had so many interviews with these people, and they weren't all weepy interviews either. Like a lot of them, there was anger and there was apprehension and there was mistrust and there was
and the
lack
NASA,
of guilt by the head NASA
yeah,
guy.
the NASA guys are still like, I made the decision I had with the information I had at the time, and I would make that decision again, even knowing what happened. And I'm like
you're a jerk.
I really hope that's a defense mechanism because you can't, like, your brain just can't let you comprehend the horror of what you did.
Yeah.
Like, I really hope that that's why you're defensive, is because you just can't live with yourself if you face the truth of what you actually did.
Well, and that's also probably more an old-fashioned manager guy who just like, I'm making a decision and I'm living with it no matter what the consequences are.
Right. All the NASA guys from the 80s were like old military guys with like crew cuts and
Still.
Yeah, still. So if you, speaking of NASA, we also did a podcast on the Netflix fiction series Away. You should check that out. We've done a lot of space stuff apparently because S is for September and space, I guess.
And we all want to get the F out of here.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want to listen to that, you can, to our episode on Away, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Google Play, Ghana, if you're in India, IMDb, did I already say YouTube? And also Amazon Music. We are on Amazon Music. Please find us there. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so that other people can find us. If you want to check us out on Facebook and Twitter, our handle is Coco and Daltz. If you want to email us and let us know what you think about the podcast, what you want to hear us review in the future, you can email us at cocoanddaltz@gmail.com. And finally, you can find us on the interwebs at cocoanddaltz.com for our reviews of things that we do not talk about on the podcast.
So that's another edition of the podcast, listener. And if we ever get through Ratchet, that's probably a future podcast for you to look forward to.
We're having a tough time with that one.
Oh man, that's a 1 episode a night kind of deal. After that, totally. I just want to lie down and eat ice cream or something like that. Like do something joyful.
So for another episode, thanks for listening. I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.